So, welcome everybody to Care and the Future of Learning series. This is episode 5 with Bryoni Trezise. And I'm going to let Bryoni introduce herself in a moment. Bryoni wrote a fabulous paper on creativity as care during COVID-19. But before we begin talking about the paper, let's just introduce yourself and what you do to the audience who may or may not know your work.
Thanks, Mary. So I teach and research in theatre and performance studies at the University of New South Wales. At the moment, I'm researching and writing a book on young people in digital media and how they kind of perform young people's identities on digital media. And I call that the viral child. And in my teaching, I increasingly expand the core knowledge principles within the discipline of theatre and performance studies to students in broad disciplines. So we're working with the tools, the creative literacies, if you like, as the building blocks of how we can build new ideas with students, across the university.
Yeah, because that's, what's really interesting, I think, about your work and in particular the piece that was curated for the journal, which was around care. But you have this notion of, and this is part of what you were writing about, creativity as care, but how, and sort of the critical place of that, I suppose, and the need for that both within the context of COVID, which is where we were writing, but also more broadly in terms of the application. So maybe I could start there, and then we'll go into what you learnt through the home experience, which reoriented that question as well.
So if I'm completely honest, the thinking behind the paper and the practice that the paper documents came from the urgency of my home situation, which was there were 2 young kids at home for a very long period of time. And we are not an enormously screen-based household, and we're very conscious that we needed to scaffold for them a way to be in this very particular time. And the only scaffolding that I have is the scaffolding that I've cultivated through my discipline. So that was there. And that's kind of a set of tools that through watching my kids, how kids play naturally, if you like. And there's an amazing researcher Abigail Hackett, she calls this wild literacies, the way young people, kids just kind of emerge into their knowing, if you like, through, just without planning, they do a drawing or what have you. Through watching that, I kind of came up with a series of frameworks around how we can be purposeful with what we have around us, how we can listen in to our environment and the world around us and use that as a place to begin, but also as a place to trust what comes next from that, if that makes sense. And a few other little kind of tools that in a way were really extrapolated from the home life and kind of fed into the teaching life, the online teaching life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that was what I think particularly interesting is that incorporation. Whatever word you want to use, but there's something about that kind of intuitive sense of learning that is what I might call it, but whatever we call it, that you're observing in young learners, I guess. And the necessity of that, I suppose, in providing it back into a university classroom. Like, it's almost like we in some ways we lose some of that creative thinking in the development of as people become more academically inclined, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that in that sense, the course was designed before COVID.
Yeah.
So this course in creativity was actually already responding to a bigger zeitgeist and a bigger set of questions around what is the function of teaching and learning at the moment in university context, but also all the way down. And I was already responding to, pioneers in this thinking, Ken Robinson and people like that who make the big call to unlearn learning, who say that we don't grow out of creativity. No, we don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it. So we're kind of that concept that we're born full of it and we lose it as we kind of become systematized and institutionalized and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think is was at the core of your paper. But as you say, kind of contextually, it's broader than that. It was already there as a series of questions, and the paper kind of funneled it in. But it is that sense that you know, taking care in learning kind of taps into other forms of learning practice, which aren't just purely about the thinking mind. And because you are at dance and performance, it's offering also an approach to thinking methodologically, I guess, of other ways of thinking about learning. It's more a reflection, really. But
yeah, I mean, I have a secret side hustle as a I'm trying to write a novel for young children.
right.
And why am I mentioning that here? Because I'm witnessing the capacities or not of that, of my own ability to tap into that emergent knowing, or trust where you're going without knowing where you're going. And I think it's a absolutely vital intuition. You've called it. That's what it is: intuition and instinct, and listening to impulse. And I don't know, I think that we have less and less spaces in which we are encouraged to name that as a particular skill and given the space and time to cultivate it. But it's an essential part of, isn't it, being a human animal, and the way in which we can think more wholly as humans. Yeah.
I think that's pretty good. I mean, I would agree, you know, in that too. It's also another way of approaching some of the difficulties of you know, models of learning and teaching that try to just have outputs as if they are, you know, you can mark and assess without that sensibility around you know, the learning practice itself, like returning to the pedagogical practice, actually, however you want to define that, whether it's creative or not, you know, however your field is, it's an essential part of actually thinking about learning. And if you don't have some rationale around it, I guess it, you know, I think students and us, you know, who are involved in teaching it, it just becomes a meaningless practice. So it's sort of almost bringing meaning back into the classroom as well.
And just the sense that you're right, long before I was teaching these kind of workshop-based classes in the theatre, the sense that the best feeling in the classroom is the one that's a dialogic, emergent discussion. And Mary, I'm thinking back into the olden days when physical lecture halls were full, and I even back then I would always plan them as an emergent conversation rather than as a data dump, as I'm sure you do too in your teaching, right? And you know, that's where the amazing ideas come from. It's in the crossfeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's in the crossfeed. So it's
and
about
I learn more actually from, because I mean, I know what I know, but I'm actually curious in what they know because I know what I know, you know. And it's when you kind of are in that space in which you're actually learning at the same time. It almost also provides a different way of thinking about hierarchy and relationships as well. It gives people a sense of agency, maybe. Yeah, so there's all of that. But just to round off and to finish up, was there anything you wanted to add to as a final comment or thought?
I've read through the issue now that it's out, and look, your discussion with Catherine Hales really struck me around the idea of the unthought as kind of a, you know, I'm never going to convey it as beautifully as it was in that interview and in her work, but for me that sparkled with all the glistening possibility of I think what I'm trying to still wrestle with in my teaching and in my writing and indeed in the kind of the future of learning and teaching, but also you know, the role of the academic context, which is kind of naming and framing our responsibility to that future, you know, as well. So if anything, I don't know, maybe that's me trying to draw a thread together or just kind of wrap up a bit where I see the bigger this conversation traveling.
Great. Thank you.